Picture a school cafeteria. Hundreds of kids. Noise everywhere. Trays clattering. Sneakers squeaking on linoleum. Voices bouncing off every wall. It's just another Tuesday. Just another lunch period. Just another ordinary day at Pinecrest Elementary School in Georgia. And then, silence. Not the whole room. Just one table. Just one corner. Because one little boy, 8 years old, small for his age, carrying a worn-out library book under his arm, had walked to his seat and stopped cold. There was a piece of paper taped to his chair. He leaned in and read it. And the word on that paper, a single, ugly, deliberate word, would light a fire that nobody in that school district was prepared for. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. He simply looked up, looked around, and said, quietly, clearly, with every ounce of dignity his 8-year-old body could carry, "No." That one word. That one moment. That one little boy. By the end of this story, 4 million people would see what happened next. A principal would resign. A superintendent would be facing a federal civil rights complaint. And an 8-year-old boy would stand in front of a microphone and say something that would make grown adults break down in tears. Stay with me, because this story, every single detail of it, is one you need to hear from beginning to end. And before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel tells stories that matter. Stories about real courage, real justice, and real people who refuse to be silent. Subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss one. Now let's get into it. Before we get to the cafeteria, before we get to the label, before we get to the 4 million views and the emergency board meeting and the resignation, you need to know who Elijah Carter is. Because this story doesn't make sense without understanding the boy at the center of it. Elijah Deshaun Carter was 8 years old. He was small, the kind of small where teachers always double-checked the roster because they assumed someone that size had to be in 2nd grade, not 3rd. He had big, serious eyes that seemed like they were always working something out. Always calculating. Always observing. His teachers called it focus. His mother called it a gift. His best friend Jordan just called it the face Elijah makes when he's about to say something that makes everybody feel dumb. He loved science. Not in the way kids say they love things and mean they've watched a few YouTube videos. He loved science the way some people love air, like it was the thing that made life make sense. He could tell you the distance between Earth and Mars. He could explain why the sky was blue and why sunsets were orange and why neither of those things was actually what it looked like. He had a model of the solar system on his dresser at home, handmade, each planet painted carefully with his own little hands, their surfaces detailed with craters and storms and rings. He wanted to be an astronaut, not a firefighter, not a football player, an astronaut. He used to tell his mother, Diana, that he wanted to float above the earth and look down and see how small everything was. He said it made problems seem easier to handle when you could imagine them from that far away. Now, Diana Carter. You need to know Diana Carter. Diana was 34 years old, though she looked both older and younger than that at the same time. Older because of the tiredness around her eyes, younger because of the fire behind them. She was a registered nurse at a regional hospital 45 minutes from their house. She worked double shifts. She worked overnight. She worked weekends. She worked every hour she could because there was rent to pay and a little boy to feed and school supplies to buy and dreams to fund. She did it alone. Elijah's father, Raymond Carter, had died 4 years earlier. He had been a construction worker, a quiet, hard-working man who sang off-key in the kitchen and called Elijah "my little scientist" before the boy was even old enough to know what a scientist was. Raymond died in a workplace accident when Elijah was 4 years old. A structural failure on a job site. An investigation that went nowhere. A settlement check that was too small and arrived too late, and came with paperwork that Diana signed with shaking hands because she had no other choice. Elijah remembered his father the way you remember a warm blanket you had as a child. You couldn't always picture it exactly, but you remembered how it felt. Safe, sturdy, present. Raymond had given Elijah a book before he died. A children's book about the universe, stars and black holes and galaxies, written simply enough for a toddler, but deep enough to grow with the child. Elijah still carried it. The spine was cracked. 2 pages were torn at the corners. The cover was soft from years of handling. He carried that book in his backpack every single day the way other kids carried Lucky Charms. Diana worked every shift she could to make sure that little boy never felt the absence of a dream. She packed his lunch with little notes tucked under the sandwich. She quizzed him on science facts during the drive to school. She stayed up late helping him research projects on their shared laptop, the screen glowing long after midnight, while Elijah sketched diagrams and Diana nodded along to things she barely understood, pretending she did because she didn't want him to slow down. That was Elijah's world. That was what he carried with him every morning into Pinecrest Elementary School. In Pinecrest Elementary, you need to understand this too. Pinecrest was a mid-sized public school in a mid-sized Georgia town. For years, it had been in a predominantly white neighborhood with a tight-knit community of families who had been sending their kids there for generations. Then the school district was redistricted. A lower-income, predominantly black neighborhood was brought into the Pinecrest zone. Suddenly, the school that had looked one way for decades looked very different. Some people adjusted. Some people welcomed it. And some people, quietly, with smiles on their faces at school board meetings, did not. The tension was never loud. It was the kind of tension that lives in hallways and parking lots and cafeteria seating arrangements. The kind of tension that teachers noticed but didn't name. The kind that made certain children feel watched, measured, and found wanting every single day. Elijah had been at Pinecrest for 2 years. He sat in the front row in his homeroom class, not because anyone told him to, but because that's where he could see the board best. His teacher, Mrs. Patricia Holt, was a 20-year veteran with a warm smile and a nervous laugh she deployed whenever conversations got uncomfortable. She liked Elijah. She genuinely did. She thought he was brilliant. She just wasn't quite sure what to do with the world he came from. Elijah's best friend was Jordan Webb. Jordan was everything Elijah was not. Loud where Elijah was quiet. Impulsive where Elijah was deliberate. Quick to laugh where Elijah was quick to think. They had become friends the way children sometimes do, through proximity and persistence and a shared love of something specific. In their case, it was a particular video game about space exploration that they played at Jordan's house on Friday afternoons. Jordan's older brother, Darnell, 16, always had headphones around his neck, always seemed to be filming something on his phone for some reason nobody ever quite understood, sometimes drove them home. Darnell was the kind of teenager who seemed indifferent to everything but was actually watching all of it, filing it away. That habit would matter more than anyone knew. And then there was Tyler Briggs. Tyler was 9, a year older than Elijah, a head taller, and the kind of loud that fills rooms. He wasn't stupid, that was the thing. He was smart in a calculated way, the kind of smart that knows exactly which jokes land and which lines it can cross, and who will look the other way when they need to. He had grown up watching adults look the other way. He had learned that lesson very, very well. His father was Donald Briggs, superintendent of the entire school district, a broad man with a firm handshake and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Donald Briggs had been superintendent for 11 years. He sat on 3 local boards. His name was on a plaque in the lobby of the district office. He had not gotten to where he was by handling controversy. He had gotten there by making controversy disappear. Tyler knew this. Children always know these things. And then there was Principal Karen Odom, 52 years old, 17 years in school administration. She had a reputation as a competent, steady hand, which in school district language meant she was excellent at not making waves. She had a photo on her desk of herself shaking hands with Superintendent Donald Briggs at a district awards ceremony. She smiled a lot. She used phrases like, "We're all learning," and "Let's keep this in perspective." These were the people in Elijah Carter's world. Now, before we get to what happened in that cafeteria, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about this genuinely. Have you ever been in a room, a school, a workplace, a neighborhood, where you could feel that something wasn't right, but nobody was saying it out loud? Where the rules seemed to apply differently to different people, and everyone just sort of accepted it? Leave your answer in the comments below. Because what happens next at Pinecrest Elementary School is about exactly that kind of room. It was a Tuesday. Elijah arrived at school excited. It was science fair sign-up day. He had been planning his project for 2 months, a model of the solar system, each planet labeled with the name of a black astronaut or space pioneer. Mae Jemison on Saturn, Guyon Bluford on Jupiter, Robert Henry Lawrence Jr. on Mars. He had the whole thing mapped out in a notebook with careful diagrams and a list of materials he needed. He signed up first thing in the morning. Mrs. Holt smiled. She said, "Elijah, that sounds wonderful. And she meant it. He floated through his morning classes. He raised his hand in math. He aced a reading quiz. He ate a small bag of pretzels at his desk during break and drew a new diagram of Jupiter's surface in the margin of his notebook. It was the kind of morning where everything felt possible. Then it was lunchtime. Elijah walked into the cafeteria with Jordan at his side. They were talking about the science fair. Jordan had decided to do his project on volcanoes, which Elijah had already calculated would rank third at best, and Jordan already knew this and didn't care. They were laughing about it. Elijah turned toward their usual table and stopped. There was a folded piece of paper taped to his seat. Just one seat. Not Jordan's. Not anyone else's. His. He walked closer. He leaned down. He read it. The word on that paper was monkey, written in thick black marker. Capital letters. No ambiguity. No alternative interpretation. Someone had looked at Elijah Carter, this boy who wanted to be an astronaut, who carried his father's book in his backpack, whose mother worked double shifts so he could have a future, and decided that word was what he was. Jordan saw it at the same time. His face went rigid. He grabbed Elijah's arm and whispered, "Elijah, just ignore it. Just leave it. Don't." But Elijah didn't ignore it. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He stood very still, the way he stood when he was working something out. And then he looked up, and across the table, Tyler Briggs was watching him with two of his friends, waiting, expectant, eager, expecting tears, expecting rage, expecting something they could laugh at later and dismiss as nothing. Elijah reached down, peeled the label off the chair slowly and deliberately, and held it up. Not at Tyler, not as an accusation, not as a weapon. He just held it in the light, looked at it, and then looked around the table, letting every person sitting there see exactly what it said. The cafeteria had gone very quiet in that one corner. And then Elijah said, in a voice that did not shake, "No, I won't sit here with this on it. And I won't pretend I didn't see it." He folded the paper, put it in his pocket, picked up his tray, and walked directly to Mrs. Holt's table across the room. Can you believe that? 8 years old. He didn't need anyone to tell him what to do. He knew what dignity looked like because someone had spent 8 years showing it to him every single day. He placed the paper on the table in front of Mrs. Holt and said, simply, "Someone put this on my chair." Mrs. Holt picked it up. The color drained from her face. Her hands moved quickly, folding it, covering it, almost reflexively, as if hiding it faster would make it smaller. She looked at Elijah, and then she looked away. She said, "Oh, Elijah, I'm okay. I'll handle this. Go ahead and find another seat for now, okay?" Elijah looked at her for a moment. That long, measuring look. And then he nodded. He found another seat. He sat down. He opened his science notebook and kept working on his project. Jordan sat down beside him. Didn't say a word. Just sat there. And sometimes that is the most important thing a friend can do. Just stay. Just witness. Just refuse to let someone sit alone. By the end of the school day, Mrs. Holt had delivered the note to Principal Karen Odom. And this is where the story shifts, because what Principal Odom did next was not what any of them should have done. When she saw the paper, Principal Odom's first phone call was not to Elijah's mother. It was to Donald Briggs. The conversation lasted less than 4 minutes. When Odom hung up, she called Tyler's classroom. Tyler was brought to her office. She spoke to him for 12 minutes behind a closed door. She called his father, who was, again, Donald Briggs, because Tyler Briggs's father was the most powerful person in the entire school district, and Karen Odom had not spent 17 years in administration by forgetting which way the wind blew. By the end of the afternoon, the official position of Pinecrest Elementary School was this: the incident was a misunderstanding. There would be no formal write-up, no letter sent home to Elijah's family, no suspension, no disciplinary record. Tyler Briggs walked out of that office and went to PE class. Elijah walked home that afternoon carrying his father's book and his science notebook and the knowledge that something real and deliberate and cruel had happened to him today, and the adults around him had decided it wasn't worth a piece of paper. Diana Carter was not called. Not that day. Not the next morning. Not at all. If this were your child, if you sent your son or daughter to school and something like this happened and nobody told you, what would you do? Think about that. Leave it in the comments. Because what Diana Carter did when she found out is something a lot of parents talk about doing and very few actually see through to the end. Elijah came home that Tuesday quieter than usual. Diana noticed before she even sat down. She was still in her scrubs. She'd come home between shifts, had maybe 90 minutes before she had to turn back around and go back to the hospital. She had planned to heat up food, check his homework, and leave. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table across from her son and looked at him the way mothers look at their children when they know something is wrong and are still hoping they're wrong about it. She said, "How was school today?" Elijah said, "Fine." She waited. She was good at waiting. It was one of the things nursing had given her, the ability to hold silence without filling it. He looked at his plate. He pushed a piece of rice around. And then, slowly, he told her. He pulled the story out word by word, starting with the cafeteria and the chair and the label. He told her what he'd done. He told her what Mrs. Holt had said. He told her that by the end of the day, everyone seemed to want to act like it hadn't happened. Diana Carter sat completely still through all of it. She set her fork down. She did not cry, not in front of him. She asked him 3 careful questions. Did anyone touch you? Did any adult say they would follow up with you directly? Did anything else happen today that felt wrong? He answered each one. She listened to every answer. Then she stood up, kissed him on the top of his head, told him she loved him and that he had done everything exactly right, and she walked to her room. She called the school. It was after hours. She left a voicemail for Principal Odom, polite, direct, requesting a callback by 8 the next morning. She left a second voicemail for the main office line. Then she went back to the hospital and worked her shift all night, with Elijah's story sitting behind her eyes every single hour. The callback did not come by 8. By 9:15 the next morning, Diana had driven to Pinecrest Elementary in her scrubs, straight from the end of her overnight shift. She walked to the front office and told the secretary that she needed to speak with Principal Odom about an incident involving her son. She was asked to wait. She waited. 20 minutes. 30. 40. 45. At 45 minutes, she stood up, walked back to the desk, and said, calmly, "I've been waiting 45 minutes. Can you tell me if Principal Odom is available?" The secretary, and this detail matters, glanced down at something on her desk before she looked up, like she was checking a note, like she had been given instructions. Then she said that Principal Odom was in a meeting and would not be available until the afternoon. Diana asked to leave a written note. She wrote one. She asked for confirmation that it had been received and when she could expect a response. The secretary said she'd pass it along. Diana asked for the incident report from the previous day. She used those exact words, incident report. The secretary paused. She said, "I'm not sure what you're referring to." Diana said, "My son reported a racially charged incident in the cafeteria yesterday. There should be a formal report filed. I'd like a copy of that report." The secretary said she'd need to check with administration. Diana said she'd wait. She did not get the report. A vice principal appeared, materializing from some back hallway with that particular brand of rehearsed calm that school administrators develop, and told her, carefully, that the matter had been reviewed and addressed internally, and that the school considered it resolved. Diana asked for that in writing. There was a long pause. Then she was told that would require a formal records request and could take several days to process. Diana thanked them. She walked to her car. She sat in the parking lot for exactly 3 minutes. And then she opened her phone and started taking notes. Times, names, exact words, every detail. She had learned, in 12 years of nursing, that documentation was everything. That the moment something became important, you needed a record that started before you knew it was going to matter. She was going to build one now. That night, she searched online. She wasn't sure exactly what she was looking for, a hotline, a form, a lawyer, a next step. Through a community forum, she found the name of a civil rights attorney based in Atlanta. Charles Emmett Winston III, 46 years old, Harvard Law, 20 years specializing in civil rights cases in education. He had been involved in 3 cases that resulted in state-level policy changes. His fee structure included pro bono work for cases that met certain criteria. Diana read his entire biography twice. Then she called the number on his website. It was 8:30 at night. She expected voicemail. He answered. She told him the basics in 5 minutes, speaking clearly, keeping her voice steady. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a pause, and then he said 4 words. "Don't say anything else." He meant to anyone official. Don't call the school again without him present. Don't respond to anything in writing without him reviewing it first. Don't speak to the district, to the superintendent's office, to anyone connected to the school system without representation. She asked why. He said, Because the moment you walked into that front office asking for an incident report, someone made a phone call. And right now, they are preparing a version of this story that does not match your son's experience. I want to make sure that your documentation is airtight before they have time to finish writing theirs. Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do I do right now?" He said, "Write down everything your son told you, word for word, tonight, while it's fresh. Don't edit it. Don't clean it up. Just write down exactly what he said, exactly what you observed, and exactly what happened when you went to the school. Timestamp everything. Then get some sleep." She wrote for 2 hours. Every word, every detail, every pause in Elijah's voice when he had been telling her. The way he'd pushed the rice around. The look on his face. She wrote it all down in the Notes app on her phone and then emailed it to herself so there was a timestamp she couldn't alter. Meanwhile, at school, Elijah went back the next day. And the day after that. Because Diana Carter did not raise a boy who ran from things. She raised a boy who walked toward them with his chin up and his father's book in his backpack. But Tyler Briggs had not been transferred, had not been moved to another class, was not suspended, was, in fact, present and fully operational in the same school, same hallways, same cafeteria. And Tyler, emboldened, perhaps, by the absolute absence of consequence for what he'd done, was not finished. He didn't use the word again. Not directly. He was too smart for that. But there were whispers, gestures, a snicker when Elijah answered a question correctly in class that week. A comment, quiet enough to be deniable, when Elijah walked past his lunch table. Nothing that any adult could put on a form. Just the steady, grinding cruelty of a child who has learned that the system will not stop him and has decided to lean into that fact. Jordan was there every day. He walked with Elijah through the halls. He sat beside him at every meal. He was louder than usual, like he was filling the space with himself on purpose, making it harder for anything small and cruel to find a way in. He didn't say a lot about what was happening. Jordan's ways were usually louder and faster than this situation allowed. But he understood, instinctively, that what Elijah needed was not analysis or advice. It was witness, someone to stand beside him and see what was happening and refuse to look away. So Jordan showed up and witnessed. At night, Diana could hear Elijah through his bedroom door. Not crying loudly, just sounds. The kind a child makes when they are trying very hard not to let you hear them, which of course tells you everything. She sat outside his door one night with her back against the wall in the hallway, and she just stayed there. Not knocking, not going in, just being as close as she could be from the other side of a door. Listening, hurting, and building something in her chest that was not grief and was not rage, but was something colder and more purposeful than both. She thought about Raymond. She thought about what he would have said. She thought about all the times, in the years before he died, that he had held this little boy and talked to him about the world, about how to move through it, about what it would ask of him, about the dignity that no one could take from you as long as you refused to give it away. She thought about his book, worn soft with years of use, sitting in her son's backpack at the foot of his bed. And she made a decision. Not a loud decision. Not a decision she announced. Just a quiet, immovable settling inside her, like a foundation being poured. She was not going to let this get buried. Diana Carter had not gone to the press. Let me be very clear about that. She had not posted anything on social media. She had not called a news station. She had not told more than 1 or 2 people outside of Charles Winston's direction, because Winston had been specific. Keep the circle small until we're ready. But there was someone who hadn't gotten that memo. Beverly Okafor had been Diana's co-worker for 6 years. They had been through 2 bad flu seasons together, a pandemic, 3 different hospital directors, and the particular brand of bone-deep exhaustion that only other nurses fully understand. Beverly was warm the way a fireplace is warm. Constant, reliable, the kind of person you found yourself walking toward when things got hard. About a week after the incident, Diana broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, in the hospital break room, between the end of one task and the beginning of another. Beverly walked in and found her sitting with her face in her hands, shoulders curved inward, and Diana, who had held everything together for 8 solid days, looked up and didn't have anything left to hold with. She told Beverly everything. Beverly listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer solutions. She got Diana a cup of coffee and sat across from her and heard every word. Then she hugged her. Then she told her that Elijah was going to be okay. And she meant it. What Diana didn't know was that Beverly had a cousin named Adrian who ran a community Facebook page. Not a news outlet. Not a journalism organization. Just one of those local pages where people share community events and school news and occasionally stories that matter to the people in that town. It had around 80,000 followers. Beverly went home that night and called Adrian. She told her the story. She said she wasn't posting anything without Diana's permission, and that Diana would need to agree before a single word went anywhere. Then Beverly called Diana. Diana called Charles Winston. Charles Winston was quiet on the phone for longer than he usually was. Then he said, "I can't tell you not to do this. What I can tell you is that once it's public, it's public. There is no putting it back. And once it goes up, the district is going to move fast. Are you ready for that?" Diana thought about Elijah's voice through the bedroom door. She thought about the secretary checking her notes before telling her Odom was unavailable. She thought about the word resolved. She said, "Post it." Adrian wrote the post on a Tuesday evening. She kept it factual and calm. She described what had happened to Elijah in the cafeteria. She described Diana's repeated attempts to reach the school and the absence of a return call. She described the missing incident report and the school's classification of the event as a misunderstanding. She included Elijah's age. She did not include his last name. By midnight, the post had 12,000 shares. By Wednesday morning, it had 200,000. By Wednesday afternoon, local news affiliates had vans parked outside Pinecrest Elementary School. And then Wednesday evening brought something that nobody, not Diana, not Charles Winston, not Beverly, not Adrian, not the school board, not Superintendent Donald Briggs in his office watching all of it spiral past the edges of his control, had anticipated. Darnell Webb had been thinking about that lunch period for 10 days. He was 16. He was always filming things on his phone, little clips, just moments, nothing specific, just the habit of a teenager who lived with a camera in his hand. He had been in the cafeteria that Tuesday because the seniors had a free period and he'd wandered down to find Jordan. He had been filming something completely unrelated, a joke, a bit, something for his own amusement, when Elijah walked to the table and stopped. He kept filming without really knowing why. The way you sometimes do when you can feel that something is happening, even when you can't name what it is yet. He had watched the news Wednesday morning. He sat on the edge of his bed and stared at his phone and understood very clearly what he had. He uploaded it Wednesday afternoon. 47 seconds of video. Clear as daylight. The cafeteria. The label on the chair, visible to anyone watching. Elijah walking up. Elijah reading it. Elijah's stillness. That long, working it out stillness that everyone who knew him recognized. And then, as clear as anything ever caught on a phone camera. "No, I won't sit here with this on it. And I won't pretend I didn't see it." 47 seconds. 4 million views in 18 hours. The school's Facebook page buckled under the weight of comments. The district's phone lines were flooded. News vans arrived outside both the school and the district office before sunrise Thursday. 2 national morning television programs had called Charles Winston's office by 7 a.m. A man in his 70s who had marched in Selma in 1965 shared the video to his own page and wrote 4 words underneath it. Same fight. Different child. Superintendent Donald Briggs called an emergency school board meeting for Friday evening. What do you think he expected that meeting to look like? What do you think he planned to say when he walked into that room? Put it in the comments. Because what actually happened in that room on Friday night was nothing. Nothing at all. Like anything he had prepared for. The meeting room at the Pinecrest district office held about 200 people. By the time the doors opened Friday evening, there were over 400 people outside. Someone set up a speaker in the parking lot so the overflow crowd could hear. People stood in the October cold and listened through static. Teachers who had taken personal days to be there. Parents from both sides of the redistricting line. Community members who had never attended a school board meeting in their lives and had driven across town because something in what they'd seen wouldn't let them stay home. Inside, every seat was filled. Local pastors, teachers, journalists from 3 different news organizations. A documentary filmmaker who had seen the video and driven 4 hours. A retired educator who had spent 40 years in Georgia public schools and had taken the train in that morning. And in the very front row, in her nursing scrubs, because she had come directly from a 12-hour overnight shift, because Diana Carter did not have the luxury of taking a night off, Diana sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight as a rod. She had not slept in 22 hours. Charles Winston sat beside her. Charcoal suit. Slim briefcase on his lap. The look of a man who had sat in rooms exactly like this many times and was never surprised by them anymore. Superintendent Donald Briggs came in through a side door and took his seat at the board table. He looked the way powerful men look when the ground is moving under their feet, controlled on the surface, recalculating underneath everything. He had a statement prepared. You could tell from the way he kept touching the paper in front of him, smoothing it, the way you touch something when you are reminding yourself it exists. Before he could formally open the meeting, Charles Winston stood. He walked to the front of the room. He placed a single document on the board table, in the center, where every member could read it without moving. And then he said, in a voice that didn't need to be loud to fill the room, "This is a formal civil rights complaint filed with the United States Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, alleging that Pinecrest Elementary School and this school district violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by failing to respond appropriately to a racially hostile act targeting a student, and by subsequently failing to investigate, document, or report that incident through any proper channel." The room was completely still. Donald Briggs stared at the document. His jaw moved once, like he was forming a word, and then stopped. Winston walked back to his seat and sat down. Then the public comment period began. The first speaker was a teacher who had been at Pinecrest for 12 years. She stood at the microphone with her hands clasped in front of her and her voice shaking. She talked about things she had seen in those 12 years and not known how to name. She talked about a meeting she'd had with administration 2 years ago when she'd raised a concern and been told to keep an eye on it. She looked at the front row and she said, "I should have done more. I am sorry that I didn't." The second speaker was a parent from the original neighborhood, a woman who had sent her children to Pinecrest for 8 years, who had been part of this community long before the redistricting. She talked about showing her son the video earlier that week. Her son had watched it twice. Then he'd looked at her and said, "Mom, what Elijah did was the bravest thing I've ever seen." She turned to the board table and said, "I don't know what decisions this district is going to make in the coming weeks, but my family is watching every single one of them." The third speaker was a man in his early 60s who said he had attended Pinecrest Elementary himself. In the earliest years after integration, when the school was only beginning to change, when the tension then had been louder and more visible than the tension now, but had the same roots. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just talked about those hallways and what they had felt like, and what he had hoped, for 40 years, he said, for 4 decades, that they would feel like by now. He talked slowly, and the room was so quiet that you could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. And then Jordan Webb stood up. He was 10 years old. He was wearing a collared shirt that someone had clearly ironed very carefully. He was holding a sheet of paper, but he didn't look at it. He looked at the board table, and then he looked past the board table, past the cameras and the journalists and the full rows of adults, to the front row, where Elijah was sitting next to his mother. And Jordan said, in a voice that shook only a little, "Elijah is the smartest person I know. He wants to be an astronaut. He carries his dad's book everywhere he goes. He never did anything to anybody, and he deserved better. And I think everybody in this room already knows that." He folded his paper. He sat down. Several adults in that room were crying. Quietly, in that private way adults cry when they're trying not to, which somehow makes it more visible, not less. Principal Karen Odom, who had been sitting off to the side of the room with district legal counsel, stood up. She crossed to the board chair. She handed him a letter. He read it silently. Then he looked up and told the room that Principal Karen Odom had submitted her formal resignation, effective immediately. There was a beat of silence. And then something moved through the room. Not quite applause, not quite a collective exhale, but something between the two. The sound of a room adjusting to the weight of what it was watching happen in real time. Superintendent Donald Briggs read his prepared statement. It was noticed by every journalist in the room, by every community member, by every board member watching the faces of the people in those seats, that the statement contained no apology. He spoke about taking the situation seriously, about implementing new protocols, about reinforcing the district's commitment to inclusive learning environments. He was careful and precise and said, when you stripped all the language back, absolutely nothing. When he finished, Diana Carter raised her hand. The board chair recognized her. She stood. She smoothed the front of her scrubs, still in her scrubs, straight from the hospital, 22 hours without sleep, and she looked at the board table for a long moment. Every camera in the room turned toward her. And then she spoke. My son said no to that label because I raised him to know his worth. I have worked double shifts for 4 years to give him a world where that worth is honored. And last Tuesday, he walked into this school, a school paid for by this community, by my tax dollars, by the taxes of every single family in this room. And someone decided to put a word on his chair that was designed to strip that worth away. He didn't cry. He didn't fight. He did exactly what I taught him to do. He stood up, he said no, and he went to an adult for help. And this school, and this administration, decided that what was done to my son was a misunderstanding, that it was resolved, that it didn't need a report, that it didn't need a phone call to his mother. I am telling you tonight, in front of every camera in this room, in front of every parent and teacher and community member who cared enough to show up, that is not acceptable, and we will not let it be buried in a memo. She sat down. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then it was not quiet anymore. In the weeks that followed, things moved quickly and things moved slowly, the way justice always does, swift in some directions, grinding in others, never exactly the pace you wish it would be. Tyler Briggs was transferred to another school in the district. He was enrolled in a mandatory bias education program. His father, Superintendent Donald Briggs, released a statement through the district's communications office, still without an apology, saying that Tyler had been placed in a more appropriate educational environment. 3 school board members who had reviewed the statement before it went out had reportedly pushed for stronger language. They lost that argument. For now, Charles Winston's civil rights complaint triggered a formal review by the State Department of Education. An investigation was opened into the district's reporting and response protocols for incidents of racial discrimination in schools. The investigation would take months. Winston had told Diana to expect that. He had told her to be patient and to keep her documentation organized. She kept it in a folder on her phone, backed up to 2 separate places, updated every time anything new happened. Principal Odom's resignation stood. The school moved through the rest of the year under an interim principal named Dr. Sandra Pierce, a quiet, methodical woman who, on her very first week, walked every hallway in that building and introduced herself to every student by name. Not just the ones who came to her. All of them. The students noticed. Particularly the black students who had spent years feeling like they were navigating a building that wasn't quite built with them in mind. They noticed, and they talked about it among themselves in the way kids do when something shifts. Small things always matter. They always have. The formal anti-discrimination reporting system that Charles Winston had demanded in his complaint was implemented at the district level. It required written documentation of every reported incident, mandatory parent notification within 24 hours, and an independent review process that operated completely outside the superintendent's office. Community members, particularly the black families who had been navigating the redistricted zone for 2 years, who had been feeling the tension without a name for it, pushed for the new system to have a name. They called it the Elijah Protocol. The district did not adopt that name in their official documents, but everyone in that community used it anyway. Teachers, parents, the local newspaper. Eventually, even the district's own staff started using it in internal emails without thinking about it, as naturally as breathing. The story kept moving. 4 million views became 8 million. Every major national outlet covered it. Town halls were organized in other communities that recognized their own version of Pinecrest in what had happened, their own redistricting tensions, their own unreported incidents, their own memos that had buried things that should have seen daylight. A state senator mentioned Elijah by name on the floor of the state legislature during a debate on school safety legislation. He talked about what it meant that an 8-year-old boy had done what the adults around him would not. Elijah Carter, age 8, did not watch most of this. He went to school. He kept his head down in the best possible way, forward, focused, deliberate. He sat in the front row. He raised his hand. He worked on his science fair project in the evenings with his mother, their shared laptop open between them at the kitchen table, the same, as always, the same late-night ritual they had always had. Mrs. Holt, his homeroom teacher, submitted a written statement to the state investigation. It was honest in ways that had been difficult for her. She described everything she had seen and done and failed to do. She sent a letter to Elijah through the school counselor asking for his forgiveness. He read it. He told his mother he forgave her, but that he also hoped she remembered it. Diana said that was exactly the right answer. 3 weeks after the board meeting, the Pinecrest Elementary Science Fair was held in the school gymnasium. Elijah stood behind a table at the center of the room. Behind him was a model of the solar system, larger and more detailed than the one on his dresser at home, because this was the official one, the one he had been building toward. Each planet was painted with care. Each planet was labeled with the name of a black astronaut or space pioneer. Mae Jemison on Saturn, Guyon Bluford on Jupiter, Robert Henry Lawrence Jr. on Mars. And at the center, on a small white placard next to the sun, he had written a quote he'd found in one of his library books. "The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff." He had memorized his presentation completely. He stood straight and delivered it without looking at his notes once. He explained the distance between each planet, the composition of each atmosphere, the specific significance of each person whose name now orbited his model sun, who they were, what they had done, what it had taken for them to do it. The 3 judges, including a retired aerospace engineer who volunteered at the fair every year, stood and listened to every word. They asked questions. Elijah answered every single one, some of them with details that made the aerospace engineer raise his eyebrows in a way that people in the crowd noticed. He won first place. Diana was standing at the back of the gymnasium when they called his name. She had come straight from work again, still in her scrubs, still carrying 12 hours behind her eyes. When she heard his name announced over the microphone, she pressed her hand over her mouth. He walked up to receive his ribbon. He shook hands with each of the judges. He held the ribbon carefully. He turned and looked out at the gymnasium, at the tables of children, at the rows of parents, at the banner overhead, at the whole ordinary, beautiful scene of an elementary school on a Friday afternoon, and he found his mother's face in the crowd. He gave a small nod. She gave one back. Afterward, walking through the parking lot in the cool October night, Elijah held his ribbon and was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Dad would have liked this." Diana stopped walking. She looked up at the sky, cold and clear above that parking lot, above that mid-sized Georgia town. More stars than you could count on a night like this. All those billions of ancient burning things that her son already knew the names of. She stayed there for a moment, looking up. Then she said, "Yeah, he really would have." They stood there for a moment, just the 2 of them and the stars. Then she took his hand, and they walked to the car. A journalist asked Elijah, weeks after everything had settled into its new shape, what he wanted people to know about what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. This small, serious 8-year-old with his father's books somewhere in his backpack and first-place ribbon now on his dresser beside his model solar system. He thought about the question the way he thought about all serious questions, slowly, completely, from every angle. Then he said, "I just didn't want to sit in that seat. I didn't know everybody would find out. But I'm glad they did." That was it. No drama. No performance. Just the plain, honest truth of a child who had been raised to know his worth and had refused, at the moment that counted most, to let anyone else define it. I want you to sit with that for a second, because here is what I keep coming back to every time I think about Elijah's story. He was 8 years old. He had lost his father. He was being raised by a woman who worked double shifts and packed notes in his lunch and stayed up late looking at the universe with him on a shared laptop because she refused to let him grow up without wonder. He walked into a cafeteria and found a word taped to his seat, a word designed to reduce him, to diminish him, to tell him exactly what certain people thought of his worth. And the adults around him, the people paid and trained and trusted to protect children in that building, chose to protect the system instead. And he still said no, not with his fists, not with rage, not as a performance for anyone watching. He said no because he had been taught, in 1,000 small and deliberate daily acts by a woman who had nothing to give him but love and determination and her own unshakable example, that he was worth more than that seat, that he was worth more than that word, that he was worth more than a misunderstanding. Donald Briggs resigned as superintendent 14 months after that board meeting, citing personal reasons. The board chair, when asked whether the departure was related to the Elijah case, paused for a long moment and then said, "I think everything is related to everything." Charles Winston used the case in legislative testimony to argue for mandatory reporting timelines for racial discrimination incidents in public schools across the state. The testimony became part of the public record. He referred to it, simply, as the Elijah case. Everyone knew which one he meant. Diana Carter was promoted at the hospital, charge nurse, slightly better hours, slightly better pay. She called Beverly to tell her. She cried in her car in the hospital parking lot for about 4 minutes. Not because of the job, but because Elijah had made her a card that said, "You deserve it, Mom." She still has it. It's on her refrigerator. Jordan Webb went on to win 3rd place in the science fair with his volcano project. He was, exactly as Elijah had predicted, completely delighted by this result. He framed his ribbon and hung it on his wall. Darnell Webb started a YouTube channel. He posts stories, community stories, human stories, moments that almost get missed. He has, at last count, over 1 million subscribers. He says in one of his early videos that he learned to keep filming from a Tuesday afternoon in a school cafeteria. He learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is keep the camera steady and let the truth speak for itself. And Elijah is still in school, still in the front row, still carrying his father's book. He added a new model to his dresser, larger than the last one, more detailed, every planet labeled with a name. He told his mother he wants it to be accurate enough that when he actually goes to space, he can compare it to what he sees out the window. She told him it already is. One word. That's what someone taped to that chair. One word, intended to reduce an entire human being to something smaller than what he was. And it didn't work. Not because the system protected him. It didn't, not at first. Not because every adult did the right thing. They didn't. It didn't work because one child, shaped by love and loss and books and science, and a mother who never stopped showing him what dignity looked like, looked at that word and refused to let it be true. Courage doesn't always look the way we think it will. Sometimes it's loud and cinematic and visible from a mile away. And sometimes it's a small boy in a cafeteria, peeling a label off a chair and saying no in a voice that doesn't shake. The world heard him. If this story moved you today, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because Elijah's story matters, and the way we make it matter more is by making sure it reaches as far as it can. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. Hit the bell notification so you never miss a story like this one. And leave me a comment. Tell me which moment hit you hardest. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me what you're going to do differently because of what one 8-year-old boy showed us about what it means to know your worth. Like this video. Share it. And if you know a child, any child, who needs to be reminded that their worth is not up for debate, send this to them. Elijah Carter said no, and the world listened. Thank you for watching.